Venting their fury, young Palestinians hurl stones at Israeli army vehicles just outside Jenin refugee camp. Inside, a huge military assault continues for a second day.
Just around 100 or so meters up that way, the archway you can see up there, that's the entrance to the refugee camp, but we've been told this is pretty much as close as we can get safely. You can see an Israeli military bulldozer over there. We've been hearing drones flying more or less continuously and explosions and gunfire throughout the morning.
At a hospital morgue down the road, the grief is overwhelming. A family struggle to process the death of their 14-year-old son. Amongst the injured patients being treated, those with links to militants and those with none. Mohammed Abu Saraya is a rescue worker.
I was standing with volunteer paramedics and we were discussing what to do if there's an airstrike, like how to evacuate people. There were no militants around us. We felt safe because we were wearing our uniform from the Civil Defence Force. It even has reflectors on it. But two young men next to me were martyred. They were both civilians.
Israeli officials say they're targeting militants based inside the camp who've grown increasingly influential. They struck an Israeli vehicle with a powerful roadside bomb during a previous raid 2 weeks ago. Then made a failed attempt to launch homemade rockets at a settlement. We met one young fighter as he struggled to make contact with others still battling against Israeli forces. He agreed to talk on the condition of anonymity.
The Israeli army attacked us with a lot of troops, but we knew they planned to invade Jenin. They don't go into any other city in the West Bank with so many troops, only Jenin, because Jenin has hurt the Israeli occupation. Our fighters humiliate them.
But when Palestinian fighters from places like Jenin go and carry out attacks on Israeli civilians, there's going to be a response from the Israeli side too, isn't there? And that's what we're seeing now.
Of course we will carry out our operations. We will riot, because when you come to my city, kill me and kill my children and women, I will kill the Jews, the settlers, the civilians, the soldiers.
And in the Israeli city of Tel Aviv today, fear and chaos as a Palestinian man rammed pedestrians with a car and stabbed others before being shot dead, leaving 7 injured, including a pregnant woman. With violence increasing, many Israelis support a hardline stance.
Whoever thinks that such an attack will deter us from continuing our fight against terrorism is mistaken. We will continue as long as necessary to uproot it. We will not allow Jenin to go back to being a city of refuge for terrorists.
But back in Jenin, the military operation is just further fueling resentment. This footage of Israeli soldiers inside a family home. Thousands of terrified civilians managed to flee the camp overnight and are now receiving aid. But many others are still trapped. Fatima escaped, but is focused on loved ones who were left behind.
I was asleep when a rocket fell in our neighborhood. Our windows smashed. The doors flew off. They used every criminal tactic against us in Jenin.
Who do you blame?
The Palestinian Authority and all the Arabs, because they normalized relations with a people who know nothing about humanity.
This is one of the largest Israeli incursions into the occupied West Bank in the past 2 decades, reviving memories of the bloody events of the Second Intifada. Many wonder whether another mass uprising is inevitable.
Well, the Israeli army says it seized more than 1,000 weapons and apprehended 30 suspects in Jenin. It's been hailing the operation as a success. Israeli officials had been suggesting it could be over pretty soon, but we can hear that clashes are still continuing. There have been violent confrontations in a number of parts of the occupied West Bank, including outside that hospital that we were at earlier today, with reports of the crowd outside being targeted by sniper fire and in a rocket attack leading to a number of injuries. And the focus of the violence right now very much is the West Bank. You know, the scenes here right now in recent days resemble, I think, what most people will have commonly come to associate more closely with Gaza. And some people think that we are heading towards this third intifada. Others say that whilst we're seeing, yes, these increasingly violent flare-ups, there isn't that appetite for a full-on uprising. What's important to understand, I think, right now, is that both sides have significant internal divisions. The Palestinian Authority is rapidly losing credibility in the face of growing popularity of militant groups and in the face of the entrenched nature of the Israeli occupation, whilst Netanyahu and his government in Israel have been facing huge protests by Israeli civil society in response to their controversial plans for judicial reform.
Okay, Sikander, thanks very much indeed. Well, the Freedom Theatre is a cultural centre in the Jenin refugee camp, and its artistic director, Ahmed Tabasi, was born and raised there. I spoke to him earlier on a rather bad internet connection from Jenin and began by asking how he managed to get out of the camp last night.
Luckily, I got to sneak in an ambulance and move from the camp. Many families tried to leave the camp with a very difficult situation. Not everyone success.
So you said that you snuck out in an ambulance. If they had discovered you, would they have arrested you, do you think?
For sure. I was in my underwear clothes to show them that I'm not hiding anything. So for sure, they're stopping every car. They're stopping everyone as a man above 15 years old. And for sure, if they find me in the ambulance, they would take me at least to check my ID at least.
Of course, we know that Jenin went through a horrible season of violence in 2002 during the Second Intifada. And this is so depressing that history is repeating itself. Is this as bad or is it worse?
Believe me, the Israelis brought us back 20 years. It's no difference from what has happening now and what happened in 2002. It's the same way, it's the same brutal way. The soldiers bombing, shooting, Apaches, arresting. The only difference now, they have more smart technology, drones everywhere.
So you have been imprisoned by the Israelis in the past. You spent 4 years in an Israeli jail, and you renounced violence. You want to resist the occupation through art, through theater. What do you say to those young Palestinians, or even older ones, who are saying they have to pick up stones and maybe guns to resist the Israelis?
We try to make a different reality. We try to give a chance in the Freedom Theatre to give the children a new imagination place to live different reality. But each time, after hard work, one invasion from the Israeli army will destroy all our work.
Ahmed, if Palestinians do not renounce violence the way that you did, if you carry on with the attacks, as we saw in Tel Aviv today, ramming into a crowd and stabbing innocent civilians, then that cycle of violence will never end.
My friend, this is a brutal occupation from 75 years. Every day, every night, every moment, the Israeli attacking us, occupying us, killing us. And in the end, West Americans and UK people try to compare that we are equal. We are not equal. No, the tanks came to Jenin camp.
No one is saying that you're equal or that you have equal measures at your disposal. I'm just interested in what your decision was, because you decided to renounce the violence. I wonder whether you still stick with that decision, or whether you think that path hasn't worked.
I'm still stick to that decision. I'm trying to pass it to my young people.
Ahmed Tabasi, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Well, joining me now is Oren Marmostin, Deputy Ambassador and Chargé d'Affaires at Israel's Embassy in the UK. Thanks for coming into the studio. You heard him just now, Ahmed Tabasi. So he renounced violence, having spent time in an Israeli jail. He's trying to resist the occupation with theatre, with drama. And every time he does so, and every time your IDF, your army, walks into Jenin, he feels embarrassed. What's your response to him?
First, thank you for having me, Matt. It's good to be here. I want to say something very clear just from the beginning. Israel operate only against terrorists. I couldn't be more clear on this point. And you need to understand that we are operating in a very, I would say, almost impossible situation. And if I may, I want to touch upon a very important event that happened just today. Another terrorist attack in Tel Aviv.
You mentioned it in our piece.
I know. And in this terrorist attack, unfortunately, a pregnant woman lost her child. The terrorist tried to run over civilians and then went and stabbing them.
Yeah.
This is
terrible.
brutal.
It's a terrible tragedy. It's terrible violence, and there's a cycle of it every time. I just wonder whether, and I've been to the West Bank and I've been to Gaza, and what I've witnessed is the consistent humiliation, degradation of the civilian population in those places, right? The civilian population, whether it's roadblocks, whether it's the denial of building permits, you make them feel like underdogs, like second-class citizens in their own country. That surely is a recipe for more violence.
God forbid. And I want to address the issue that you just described in the clip that you've shown. The issue of Jenin. Unfortunately, in the last 2 years, Jenin has transformed from a city to a city of terror. It has become, and I think it was mentioned in the clip, it has transformed into a safe haven for terrorists. And we are confronted in a situation in which you have 3 rivers, if I may, that are flowing to Jenin. The first river are terrorists coming from all over the West Bank. The second river is a river of finance coming from Iran. And the third river is a river of weapons. And I think your reporter, if I just may, your reporter mentioned it. What would you expect if you're trying to shoot Israelis? What would you expect to do in return? And our only sole purpose here is to address the terror
But it often looks to people who live there like collective punishment. So let me just ask you one particular question. Even the Israeli army is very upset by the fact that armed Israeli settlers in the West Bank are using violence against Palestinians. They have called this is your army, has called this nationalist terrorism. What are you doing to rein in those settlers who are making the situation worse?
There is no excuse against violence against civilians. No excuse, full stop. I want to share with you the situation that we are confronted right now. We are confronted in a situation in which there are terrorists who are operating from a civilian setting. Just to give you an example, we found in a mosque terrorists hiding bunkers, hundreds of weapons and hundreds of explosive devices. This is in a mosque. If I just may, there was a nursery in Jenin with Bob Sponge drawing on the wall with ammunition. Okay. What kind of situation is this?
But if I may, last year you expanded settlements by 4,000 units. This year by 9,000 units. You're just expanding illegal settlements. It's a creeping occupation of the West Bank. No wonder there's going to be a response.
I think what we're facing is terror that has no connection with the political situation. By the way, just in the last year, 52 Israelis, civilians, were killed. So it has to do nothing with politics and policy.
But it's all political, isn't it? And I wonder if it's a distraction. This is a distraction from the troubles that Mr. Netanyahu is having at home with his own corruption trial.
It couldn't be further from the truth. Because like I have mentioned, in the last year, 52 Israelis were killed. This involves 2 governments, different governments. The last prime minister wasn't Netanyahu. So I think the hardest situation that we are confronted with is how we encounter and confront only terrorists, and this is what we're trying to do.
Sorry, we've run out of time. Mr. Malmstein, thank you very much indeed for coming in the studio.